our favourites has come back to talk about himself, it turns out.
Make it sound very egocentric. Maybe it will be.
So 10 shekels or however much more you'd like to give to tzedakah this week again will be Shalva like last week for somebody tell me more about Shalva. It's a very good organisation for, I think, Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so here's the bowl and go for it. And are we videoing? Roll.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry I got here late. I was writing up my notes. I gave this shiur once before in Tel Aviv. And the week before I gave it, someone came up to me, someone who was new to the series of shiurim, and said, are your shiurim always this text-based? And I really wanted to make him kind of feel good, and I really wanted him to come back as well. But the truth is that they are generally quite text-based, and this is a particularly text-based shiur. So I apologise in advance if people do not like texts, but we are Jewish, and we are the people of the book. So this is a very textual shiur. And what I'd like to do is to read. I like alliterations. So I was kind of toying between either the Shiur and Shmooze, the sin of the spies, or Shiur and Shmooze, the story of the spies. And I actually went for the story because one of the things I'd like us to think about as we read the story is what is the sin? Or whether, controversially, whether there is in fact a sin at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to read, I don't know if people bought Tanakh, if you didn't, that's fine. I think it's probably a bit inappropriate to say I chose the highlights of the Parsha, but that's basically what I did. I chose the main part of it, interesting to us. I'm going to briefly go through the story that's not in here, and then we're going to read from the source sheet. The first sheet is the one that starts the story of the spies, and the story goes something like this. And as we tell the story, I'd like you to think of two questions. Firstly, what is the sin, if there is one? And secondly, bearing in mind the bad spies, the 10 bad spies, are leaders of the Jewish people, how could it be that they muck up? Or what motivates them to say what they say or to report what they report? So those are kind of the two main questions I'd like us to think about as we go through. Now, before we get to the source sheet, God says to Moshe, send for yourselves spies to spy out the land. And that's what Moshe does. He chooses 12 people, very famous names. Nachbi ben Vapsi, not sure why that name didn't catch on, but it didn't. Palti ben Rafu, don't see many of those around. Guess every now and then you hear of Gadiel. There's fewer Sodis around. There's a Susi, Gadi ben Susi. These are names that didn't really catch on. I think it's fair that I can argue that the name Calev also didn't really catch on, but Yoshua is a very famous name. They go through all the names, and then we get to the source sheet. And the source sheet starts with what Moshe says to them. Vayishlach otam Moshe, Rato et Eretz Canaan. Moshe sends them out to spy out the land of Canaan. Vayomer alehem, he says to them, Aluzeh b'negev v'alitem et ha'ar, uvitem et ha'aretz mahi, ve'et ha'am hayoshev aleha, echazak hu ha'afeh, hama'at hu imrav. Go to the south and into the mountains and see what the land's like and the people that dwell there. Are they strong or weak? Are they few or many? Uma ha'aretz asher hu yoshev ba hatova hi imra'a, uma ha'arim asher hu yoshev bahena ham b'machanim im b'mitztarim. And is the land that they dwell in, is it good or bad? And the cities, what are the cities like? Are they encamped or are they strongholds? Uma ha'aretz ashmina hi imraza, is the land fat or lean? Hayesh ba'etz im ayin, is it full of trees? V'it chazaktem u'lekachtem mi pri ha'aretz, and be strong and take from the fruit of the land. V'hayamim yemei bikurei anavim, and in those days it was the days of the grape harvests. Just as a complete aside, I don't know if anyone noticed this, but more than one of the wine companies have as their sigil
the first Jewish wine company.
which is the first Jewish wine company?
Russia.
Sorry?
Carmel, it's not.
Carmel, right.
It's a symbol of tourism.
Yeah, the military
Right,
tourism.
except they're in, you probably know this better than me, they're actually in different directions.
Yeah.
In one of them, I don't know which one, they're carrying the thing in this way, and the other they're carrying it. Anyway.
It's on the way there, they're coming and going.
Right. Anyway, okay. So
Well, no,
that's
it's for tourists, so they read from left to right.
right. Like Kissinger. You know the story of Kissinger. Kissinger comes to Israel. Golda Meir is the prime minister. I'm probably going to get this wrong. I'm sure people can correct me afterwards. And Golda Meir and Kissinger says, Madam Prime Minister, I want to tell you before we start that I am first Secretary of State, second was it an American, and third Jewish. And she says, okay, but in Israel we read from right to left. Anyway, so that's what Moshe says to them. This is what they do. Vaya'alu v'yatu et ha'aretz mi'ratzin ad rechov lavo chamat. And they went up and they toured the land from the wilderness of Sin to the place called Chamat. Vaya'alu b'negev, and they went up in the Negev. Vayavo ad Hebron, and if you can notice, there's actually a move from the plural to the singular. It says Vaya'alu, they went up. Vayavo, and he came to Hebron. And that's where the rabbis go into the fact that Calev goes to Hebron to pray at Marat HaMachpelah, and the kind of the Midrash expands on it, and he says, give me strength to kind of be able to fight against the bad intentions of the spies. And in Hebron, V'sham Achiman Sheshai V'Talmi Yilidei Ha'anak. And in Hebron are these three children of Anak. They seem to be giants, Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmi, also names didn't really catch on. And then a weird pasuk, which we're going to get back to a bit later. V'Hebron, Sheva Shanim Nivneta Lifnei So'am Mitzrayim. Just in case you were interested, Hebron was built 7 years before a place called So'an, which is in Mitzrayim. Okay. Vayashuvu mito ha'aretz miketz 40 yom, and they came back after 40 days. Vayalchu v'yavu al Moshe ve'al Aaron ve'al kol hadat bnei Yisrael, and they came to Moshe and Aaron and all the congregation of Israel. And midbar Paran Kadesha, to the wilderness of Paran. Vayashivu otam davar ve'el et kol ha'edah, and they brought back a report to the congregation. Vayaru'um et peri ha'aretz, and they showed them the fruit of the land. I guess the grapes. I actually bought grapes. I didn't actually think about it. I went camping over the weekend and bought far too much food, so I thought I'll bring it here. I didn't really think about the grape connection, but there is a grape connection, a great grape connection. V'sapulu v'yomru, and they told them and they said, "Banu el haaretz asher shalachtaну." We came to the land that you sent us to. V'gam zorat chalav udvashi, and it really is a land flowing with milk and honey. And this is its fruit. Ephes. However, ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz. The people are very fierce who live there. V'ha'arim b'tsurot gedolot ma'od, and the cities are very well fortified. V'gam yilidei ha'anak ra'im sham. We also saw the children of Anak. We saw giants there. Amalek yoshev be'eretz ha'negev. Amalek dwells in the south. V'acheti v'yebusi v'anori, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites yoshev b'har. They dwell in the mountains. V'aknani yoshev al hayam, and the Knani dwell along the sea, v'al yad hayarden, along the Jordan. By the way, Rambam says that the Ephes bit, the however, the but, that's their sin. Because they were told to report, they weren't told to give an analysis. It's a bit like, I don't know if anyone saw this going around on Facebook. Has anyone seen it's not about the nail? Have you seen this? If you're not laughing, it means you haven't seen it, firstly. And if you haven't seen it, I suggest you go to YouTube afterwards. Basically, you see a woman talking about how she's very stressed and she's got a headache and she's got high blood pressure or whatever, and as the camera pans out, you basically see a nail coming out of her head. And her boyfriend's kind of looking and nodding, and then he says, it might be connected to the nail in your head. And then she gets very upset. It's not about the nail. Why are you always saying it's about the nail? Why can't you just listen? Why can't you just listen? You don't need to always, say so. Firstly,
Why do you always want to fix it? Just listen.
right, why do you always want to fix it? Just listen. So the spies are told, just tell us, don't give us analysis, don't give us your own opinion, just tell us what you saw. And the moment they say the FS bit, when they say the people are very fierce and we can't overcome them, that's when it all starts going downhill.
But hang on a second, but he asked him to report on what kind of people and what kind of cities, etc., etc. So it just because they said bad, it's the bad, but not the fact that they reported what was awesome, but the reports.
So it's a really great point, and what I'd like us, in terms of the chronology, at this stage, the people start getting very antsy. Because at this stage it says, Vayachas Calev et ha'am el Moshe. Calev stills the people towards Moshe. So clearly something they've said here has got everyone upset. But it's actually only much later that they say something very serious, which is we can't do it because the people are stronger than us. So according to your reading, which I think is a great reading, what here have they said that's so bad? What have they said that's got everyone very upset?
Okay. I think the first thing that's interesting is that basically the difference between the height and the width of the people of Ephraim, as they see it, and of exactly even go back. And I think that difference between, I mean, is it something physical? Is it something spiritual? What is it? I mean, because they see, or their analysis starts already with what they see. I mean, because you see the I mean, they're much bigger even as they see it. So that's even before the analysis. So I mean, I think the only first step afterwards is basically how could you ask people to just report to what you see and then they can't jump to the analysis.
Right. Okay. Fair. Okay, we're going to continue with the story. So the people clearly start getting upset. Vayachas Calev et ha'am el Moshe, and Calev stills the people. He silences them before Moshe. Vayomen, he says, very Zionistic. Alon na'aleh. Then like my whole B'nai Akiva youth saying Alon na'aleh. Alon na'aleh v'yarashnu ota. We can surely go up and inherit it. Ki yachol nuchala, because we're able to. V'hanashim asher alu imo amru, and the people who were with him said, Lo nuchal lalot el ha'am. People can't go up. Ki chazak hu mimenu. Because the people who live there are stronger than us. The Gemara is going to discuss that particular sentence, what that means. V'yotziu dibat ha'aretz asher taru ota, and they gave a bad report about the land. Again, we're not sure what the bad report is so far. Ha'aretz asher avarnu ba latu ota, eretz ochelet yoshveha hi. The land that we went to is a land that devours its inhabitants. Anyone that's been here over 6 months? I'm not sure you'd necessarily be able to argue with that. And all the people we saw there are men of great stature. And we saw there the giants. We were in their eyes. We were in our own eyes like grasshoppers, and so we were also in their eyes. Now the Gemara kind of has an argument here, and they say, you're liars. Granted, you can say what you felt you were, but how can you say what they thought you were? But then there's another argument. Well, actually what happened is that they were hiding in a tree, and they overheard people say, oh, you see those things in the tree? They look like grasshoppers with human faces. So actually what the spy, according to that version, what the spies said was accurate. The other thing that the rabbis say is that the God says, you know, I tried to create an atmosphere that was conducive to you spying out. What happened? I made a lot of people die. So everyone was busy with funerals. I meant it for good. Because you saw it for bad. You said, this is the land, everyone's dying. So that's something else that the rabbis throw in. And then all the people, and everyone started crying. And here we have the origins of Tisha B'Av. The famous thing that God says, here you cried for no reason. In future nights, on this night, I'm going to give you good reason to cry. And that's kind of where the origins of Tisha B'Av come from. And then the bit that isn't the highlight, for our purposes, clearly in the Torah, all of the sentences are equal. And then basically there's an argument between God and Moshe. And God says, I've had enough, I want to wipe out the people. And Moshe comes up with this really great answer. What will Mitzrayim say? They'll say you didn't have the power to bring them in. and they kind of come to a deal that, okay, I'm not going to destroy them, but all of the men between a certain age of this generation are going to die. They're not going to go into the land. And then we get back into source sheet, Pasuk Lamed Vav. והאנשים אשר שלח משה לתור את הארץ וישוב וילינו עליו את כל העדה להוציא דיבה הארץ. And those, the bad spies, in inverted commas, וימותו אנשים מוציא דיבת הארץ רעב ומגפה לפני אדוני. They all died, all 10 of them. Those who gave a bad report in a plague before God. ויהושע בן נון וכלב בן יפונה חיו מן האשים ההם. And good spies, Calev and Yoshua, they continued to live, and they were able to go into the land. The good spies went into the land. And Moshe tells all of the people that none of the men in that generation are going in. And the people are very sad.
Does Yeshua speak up positively in the gap that is cut out of here? Or do we not hear him say anything at all?
In the Gemara is going to fill in some
in
of
the
the
text, though. Why is Yeshua say it, in other words, according to the text? Is there something that, in the gap that you cut out, does he say anything good? Like Calev does?
I don't think he does. In the Gemara he speaks up, and everyone quietens him down. And they say actually something quite interesting. They say, you don't have any children. So it's all very well you saying, of course we need to make a sacrifice, but why do you care? And that's when Calev comes in and thinks, I need to think of another strategy in order to get people on my side. But as far as I'm aware, Yeshua doesn't actually say anything.
Did you say that the men of that generation didn't go?
I think so, but then as I was saying it, I thought maybe I made a mistake. Can anyone confirm either way? Men. Great. Men.
Something to do with the golden calf or women?
There's also the story of the golden calf where a similar thing happens. And now a bit that most people don't stop reading before this. Vayashkimu baboker. And they got up in the morning, the day after they've been told they're not going in, they're going to die. V'yalu et Rosh HaLemor. And they decided to go up on top of the mountain saying, Hinenu va'alinu el hamakom asher amar Adonai ki chatanu. We've sinned. And now we do want to go into the land. Well, don't want to read the story, but basically you're right. Vayomer Moshe said, Lama ze atem ovrim et pi Adonai? Why are you transgressing God's word? V'hi lo titzlach. Nothing good will come out of this. Al ta'alu, ki ein Adonai b'kibachem. Do not go up because God's not with you. V'lo tinagfu lifnei avechem. And you won't, as they say here, you will not smite down your enemies. Ki amaleki v'knani sham lifnechem. Because you're going to be fighting the Amalekites and the Canaanites, unafaltem b'charev, and they're going to kill you. Ki al ken shavtem me'achrei Adonai v'lo yeh Adonai imachem. Because God's not going to be with you because you didn't listen, you transgressed His word. V'ya'apilu la'alot et Rosh Ha'ar, and b'chol zot, they went up onto the mountain. V'aron brit Adonai u'Moshe lo mashu miken hamachaneh. And the Ark of the Covenant and Moshe didn't leave the camp. Vayeled ha'amaleki v'aknani ha'yoshev b'harahu, and the Amalekites and the Canaanites came down from the mountain. Vayakum v'yachtum ad ha'choma, and they smote them and they beat them down even unto Choma. That's the text. So, when we began reading the text, in a second we're going to look at the Gemara, which is very difficult in my opinion. I'm not sure I even fully understand it. We asked the question, what's the sin? And these 12 men and leaders of their nation, how can it be that 10 of them screwed up so badly? What do people think? What's the sin? And how can it be that the 10 got it so wrong? Yeah.
I think there was an initial problem that 12 people were sent. Because when Yeshua sends 2 guys later, he sends 2. They can hide, they're only going to talk to each other. Here you've got 12 people with 144 opinions, and it got out of control. The whole thing is, it looks like it's Shnati going.
Okay, so that was an initial mistake, perhaps. But again, what's
their
the sin?
Their sin is not coming back. Not coming back, saying, "Wait a minute, God's with us. We can do it."
Okay. So it's not the factual report of what's there.
It's what we didn't do.
It's the whether we can do it or not.
Right.
Okay, that's fair.
They weren't asked to say whether, oh, actually, Moshe does have something to do, which is a big.
No, it doesn't.
He doesn't
Why did he
have
say
something
that?
to do.
I mean, we had the conversation before. Is it unreasonable that having spied it all out, they shouldn't be able to give their opinion on the capability?
No, they
But-
shouldn't have given
Well,
that.
wasn't there this thing about like, they were going in there? I think the sin started way before they even went. The sin was that they didn't have emunah in Hashem. That he would give the land over and that it would be fine no matter what. And they were pretending that they did have this emunah and that they were only going to see where they were going to bury their treasures or hide their treasures and what have you. That was something I remember, their initial idea. But in their hearts, and Hashem can look in our hearts, they didn't have clear hearts at all. They didn't go only for that reason. They went actually because they wanted to see, would it be safe there for us or not. They didn't believe. That
Yeah,
was
fair. John.
I have a problem with the statement that the sin was them offering their opinion, because Calev also offers his opinion. Maybe a positive opinion, but he's giving an analysis. We can go up there and take that. That's still his opinion.
But maybe more like after.
So what? Okay,
So both
so
offering their. He actually gives before. They use one word. They say, however. That's not yet really an opinion.
So
And
how
he
do
says,
you- how do
no,
you
we
read
can do it, and only then do they say, no, we can't. So actually, he's the one who gives the opinion before they do.
so if we're searching for something that goes wrong here, what goes wrong?
I don't know, but I don't think it can be just giving an opinion, because he gives his sooner and he's not punished.
I think
Yes.
the sin, we're going to take the land. The idea of sending the spies is, I think, how are we going to take the land? Like, militarily, how are we going to do this? There's not a question here. Moses isn't asking them, sending them, just saying, should we or shouldn't we? It's how are we going to do it? And they came back saying, basically answering a
Oh,
question
going a step
that
back.
Moshe
Right.
hadn't asked. And they'd basically lost faith in
Okay.
Hashem.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's to do with this grasshopper business, because they could have perceived themselves as grasshoppers and thought that maybe, the people in the land saw that, the 10 of them, as grasshoppers. But who are they to actually say collectively that all of Israel are grasshoppers and will be perceived as a grasshopper? It's
So it's kind of self-minimizing.
It's like making an assumption on the people.
Well, projecting
On the
from their own.
people something that they felt themselves,
Okay.
and I think that.
They don't say it about all of Israel, they say it about themselves.
Yeah, but it's inferred. Yeah, we were. So, but it's inferred that if we are the princes, and we are like grasshoppers, and so you, the people, surely are going to be even worse than us, because we are the princes, and we saw ourselves as grasshoppers. So it's like using psychology to make the people feel disempowered and nothing.
Okay, yeah. And then one more, and then we'll move on.
We were talking about this on Shabbos, and it was pointed out that it wasn't just 12 ordinary Joes, or even like it was pointed out. I'll say it in the name of the person who pointed out, Heinkorn. He said that this is probably elderly folk. Okay, like to put it bluntly, they're the heads of the people. In order to send out a real spy reconnaissance mission, you won't get 2 hefty, strapping young lads and send them off. You do not send 12 old altakakas, okay? So basically, it seems to me that Moshe was sending a delegation of the best and the finest people who would represent the whole of Am Yisrael and would represent the party line. And he was 100% sure that they would know what they're supposed to do, because they were going as a delegation, not really as real spies. So when he said, go out and see what it's like, he didn't really mean it ad assof. He was kind of, this is why I have a problem, because it put Moshe in a bad light, but he was kind of saying one thing but meaning another. In other words, he was saying, go see how
Go
it is.
through the motions.
But he really relied on them to be good leaders, etc., and come back with the right report, and something went wrong.
By the way, if you're a leader of a community or an organisation, often you're more conservative. Because you've got, and there is an argument that actually the 10 spies are worried that their status is going to be lost when they go into the land. There's another thing which is, I think, have a lot more sympathy with, which is Judaism in the desert is quite easy. Judaism in the land is going to be much harder. And actually, maybe the whole concept of going into the land, maybe that's going to be too difficult for us. Maybe having to make, just to to kind of throw in a contemporary angle, maybe having to make the difficult dilemmas that sovereignty throws at us, we're worried about whether we're going to be able to do it or not. And actually it would be safer for us to be in an area like the desert where we don't need to worry about those issues. But I like the thing about being older and heads of the community. One more comment and then we'll...
Yes, one thing I was thinking when I read about Chagavim, actually read the Saliyah yesterday in Shul, was that Chagavim is also the term that was used when we had the recent plague here of Arbe. And Chagav is another word for Arbe. And the word, the reputation of Am Yisrael preceded us because it took us 2 years, even the first time, to get to the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. And
so they heard about the plague.
And so because of that, maybe we saw ourselves, or the spies saw themselves, as coming to take something that wasn't theirs, to basically, jump on the whole area like locusts. And they saw themselves as not having a right to be there at all because they were taking from the fruit something that wasn't theirs. And say it's like people that nowadays say, well, maybe we don't have a right to be here. I don't want to get political or whatever, but it's this point that,
There's going to be lots of time for politics later.
Right.
I decided that I don't like people that give political shiurim, and then I realised actually I just don't like people that give political shiurim in a direction that I don't like. So, anyway, yes.
Moshe says, be of good courage, and they did that, they didn't do.
Right, okay, yeah, fair. Just another couple of things before we move on. The first is that Rashi's got this thing that's struck, again, without putting a contemporary, if you want to take it, in all of these things, if you want to take it in a contemporary direction, you're welcome, and if you don't, you're also welcome. Strong people, according to Rashi, do not need to live with walls around them.
Oh.
Strong people live in an open area because they're not scared.
Yeah.
But people who are weaker put walls around them. And so when the 10 spies come back and say, there's great fortifications, they took that as these people are very strong. Whereas according to Rashi, they should have taken it as these people are scared. What the British Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, says, he actually is very nice, he brings it into Judaism as well. We don't need to build walls around our Judaism. We don't need to separate ourselves from the outside world. People who do that are worried. But strong, proud Jews can open themselves up to other cultures without fear of anything bad happening. Now I'd like us all to turn over, and again, we still don't have an answer to necessarily what the sin was and why the spies said what they did. We're going to now read a Gemara, which in my opinion is a bit, I don't know if anyone knows someone like this. There's a colleague of mine at work who's a massive nudnik. And when they speak, I understand every word, I just don't understand how it forms a sentence. And I don't understand how those sentences form an idea, but every word I get. I think this Gemara is a little bit similar. Every word I kind of understand, I just don't think it's very clear what the Gemara is trying to get at. One other thing before we go on to the Gemara, and this was pointed out to me a couple of years ago, and I think it's fascinating. We learn in other places that if we don't behave, what does the land do? The land spits us out. What do the spies talk about the land doing? Eating up. I still don't know exactly what the nimshal, how we should understand the difference between spitting out and swallowing up. But it's interesting that the land generally is described as spitting us out if we don't behave, and here they